I always thought my life was perfectly planned. I had a loving husband, two beautiful children, a stable career, and a picturesque home in the suburbs. On paper, I had everything anyone could want. People often told me how lucky I was, whispering behind my back about how perfect my life seemed. What they didn't know, what even my husband didn't know, was that I was drowning. Drowning in the very perfection I had spent years building. Routine had become my prison. Every day was a carbon copy of the last. Wake up at 6. Make breakfast. Kiss the kids goodbye. Go to work. Come home. Cook dinner. Watch Netflix. Go to bed. Repeat. Somewhere between PTA meetings and Saturday morning grocery runs, I lost myself. I wasn't just mom or wife, I was a woman, wasn't I? Or at least I had been. Who was I now? Did I even exist beyond those roles? The thought terrified me. That's when the idea of a solo vacation struck me. A break from the monotony. A chance to find myself again, or maybe just catch my breath. I told my husband I needed time to recharge after a hectic year. He agreed without much thought, chalking it up to my responsible nature. After all, I was the rock of our family. The one who never asked for anything. I booked a week in a sunny paradise, picturing white sand beaches and endless blue skies. But as the plane ascended, doubts began to cloud my mind. Was I being selfish, leaving my family behind? What kind of mother, what kind of wife, takes off for no real reason? As the clouds blurred beneath me, another thought crept in, one I hadn't dared entertain before. What if I pretended I wasn't married? The thought sent a thrill through me, unexpected and intoxicating. For years, I had been defined by my roles as a wife and a mother. But what if, for just 1 week, I wasn't tethered to those identities? What if I could step into a different skin, if only for a little while? The idea was reckless and wild, but I couldn't shake it. When I landed at the resort, it was everything I had imagined. A sprawling sanctuary with white sand beaches, turquoise waters, and palm trees swaying gently in the breeze. Yet, as I walked through the marble-floored lobby, the weight of my wedding ring seemed heavier than ever. That small, beautiful band felt like a flashing sign. Taken. Off limits. On the second night, after a glass of wine, or maybe it was 3, I made a decision. I slipped the ring off and tucked it into the safety of my suitcase. I told myself it was harmless, just an experiment, a game to remind myself what it felt like to be untethered. No one here knew me. I wouldn't see any of them again. That night, I wore the red dress I'd always avoided back home. It hugged my figure a little too tightly, but tonight I didn't care. I let my hair down, literally, and wore it loose over my shoulders. I smiled more, laughed louder, and for the first time in years, I felt like a version of myself I'd forgotten. Then, on the third day, I met him. He was sitting alone at the bar, dressed in a white linen shirt and khaki shorts. His skin was sun-kissed, his smile easy, his posture relaxed as if he belonged in the pages of a travel magazine. He looked like the kind of man you imagine meeting in a place like this, but never really do. Our eyes met, and my heart fluttered in a way I hadn't felt in years. I quickly looked away, embarrassed by my reaction. But I could feel his gaze lingering as I slid onto a stool a few seats away. Enjoying your vacation? His voice was smooth and warm, like the whiskey he swirled in his glass. I nodded, trying to sound casual. It's been nice. Nice? He raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a smirk. You don't sound very convincing. Let me guess, you're here to escape something. The words hit too close to home, and I stiffened. How could he see right through me? Before I could fumble for a reply, he chuckled softly, raising a hand. Sorry, that was forward of me. You just don't seem like the type who does this often. Does what? I challenged, a playful edge creeping into my voice despite myself. Sits alone at a bar looking like you're waiting for something to happen. I laughed, the sound startling and unfamiliar. It felt good to laugh like that, free and unguarded. Maybe I am, I said. His name was Liam, and he was from Boston. A consultant, he told me, here on a much-needed break from his hectic schedule. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing so effortlessly it was as if we'd known each other for years. I didn't tell him much about myself, just my first name, a vague mention of being from out west, and that I worked in marketing. A half-truth. I didn't mention my husband, my children, or the life I'd left behind. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a wife, not as a mother, but as a woman. And I liked the way Liam saw me. The way his eyes lingered on me a second too long. The way his voice softened when he said my name. It was thrilling, intoxicating, and terrifying all at once. When I finally excused myself, his fingers brushed mine as he handed me my bag. "See you around?" he asked, his tone hopeful. "Maybe," I replied, my heart racing as I walked back to my room. I couldn't stop grinning. I told myself it was harmless, just a conversation, nothing more. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. I wasn't just escaping my routine. I was escaping myself, or maybe, for the first time in years, I was finally finding her. The next morning, sunlight spilled into my room, golden and warm, like a gentle reminder of where I was. My head buzzed faintly, not from wine but from the memory of Liam's smile. I told myself it had been nothing, a fleeting moment, forgotten by the time the week was over. But as I slipped into my swimsuit and headed to the pool, I couldn't shake the way he'd looked at me. Like I was the only woman in the room. I stretched out on a lounge chair, book in hand, determined to lose myself in its pages. But the words blurred together as fragments of our conversation replayed in my mind. His laugh, the way he said my name, the way he made me feel alive. "Mind if I join you?" The voice startled me, and I looked up to see Liam standing there, casual and confident, a playful grin on his face. "Thank you," I said softly, feeling a blush creep up my neck as his words settled over me like a warm blanket. His compliment wasn't just polite, it was genuine, and I could feel the sincerity in his voice. "You don't look too bad yourself," I added, a playful smile tugging at the corners of my lips. He chuckled, offering me his arm. The simple gesture felt both old-fashioned and intimate, sending a flutter through me as I placed my hand lightly on his. A staff member led us to a table set perfectly to overlook the ocean. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange, pink, and gold, the kind of breathtaking palette you only see in postcards or dreams. The sound of waves lapping gently at the shore was a quiet reminder of the paradise we found ourselves in. For a moment, I let myself sink into the illusion. I wasn't a wife or a mother tonight. I was just a woman, sitting across from a handsome stranger, basking in the glow of a perfect evening. I let myself believe, if only briefly, that I was exactly who I appeared to be. We talked for hours, sharing stories that felt more like confessions. I told him about my career in marketing, embellishing some details and leaving others out entirely. I painted a picture of a life that sounded exciting but not extravagant, interesting but not too revealing. It wasn't a complete lie, just a carefully edited version of the truth. He told me about his love of sailing, the business he'd built from the ground up, and the travels that had taken him to every corner of the world. His stories were rich with detail, the kind you could lose yourself in, and I found myself leaning in, hanging on his every word. The ease of our conversation felt like a magic trick, as if we'd skipped all the awkward steps of getting to know someone and landed straight into familiarity. As the night deepened, the space between us seemed to shrink. His hand brushed mine as he reached for his glass, and I felt a spark that sent a shiver up my spine. His eyes lingered on me a moment too long, and the air grew thick with an unspoken tension that neither of us dared to address. When the bill came, he insisted on paying. I didn't argue. It felt too good to let someone take care of me for a change, to feel wanted in a way I hadn't in years. Outside, the night was cool and quiet, the sound of waves crashing against the shore providing the perfect soundtrack to the moment. As we walked back to my room, his hand rested lightly on the small of my back, a touch that was both protective and electrifying. When we reached my door, he paused, turning to face me. His eyes searched mine, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. "Good night," he said softly, his voice filled with unspoken possibilities. "Good night," I whispered, my heart pounding as I slipped inside and closed the door. I leaned against it, my breath shaky as I tried to process what had just happened. I had crossed a line, one I knew I couldn't uncross. But as I lay in bed that night, my skin still tingling from his touch, I realized I didn't regret it. For the first time in years, I felt alive. And I wanted more. The next morning, I woke with a buzzing energy coursing through me. Liam had occupied my thoughts all night, his smile, his laugh, the way his hand had lingered on my back. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in so long that I barely recognized it. Excitement. Anticipation. Like I was the star of a steamy romance novel. For once, I didn't wake up thinking about schedules, chores, or responsibilities. I thought only of him. I spent the day wandering the resort, half hoping to bump into him, but also terrified of what might happen if I did. By mid-afternoon, the tension became too much to bear. I opened the resort app and typed a simple message, my fingers trembling slightly. Hey, are you free this evening? The reply came almost instantly, as if he'd been waiting for it. Liam, I was hoping you'd ask. Meet me by the beach bar at 7. A smile spread across my face as I read his message, my stomach flipping with a mixture of nerves and excitement. Tonight would be different. I could feel it. When the clock struck 7, I walked down to the beach, the setting sun casting a golden glow over everything. I'd spent far too long getting ready, fussing over every detail, my hair, my makeup, even my perfume. I told myself it was silly, but I couldn't help it. I wanted him to look at me the way he had last night. I wanted to feel desirable again. Liam was already there, leaning casually against the bar with a glass in hand. When he saw me, his face lit up with that boyish grin that made my heart flutter. He looked effortlessly handsome in a light blue button-up shirt rolled to his elbows and khaki slacks that hugged him in all the right places. You look, he paused, shaking his head slightly, as though words failed him. Incredible. Thank you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He took my hand, his grip firm yet gentle, and led me toward a secluded part of the beach. A private cabana awaited us, adorned with flickering candles and white linens. The sound of the ocean provided the perfect backdrop as waves softly kissed the shore. Did you plan this? I asked, surprised by the thoughtfulness of it all. He shrugged, his eyes twinkling with mischief. I wanted to make tonight special. You deserve it. The night unfolded like a dream. We dined on fresh seafood, sipped wine, and shared stories that grew deeper with each passing hour. But beneath the surface of our easy laughter, an unspoken tension simmered, growing with every glance and every accidental brush of our fingers. When dinner ended, he stood and offered me his hand. Walk with me, he said. I hesitated for only a moment before taking it. His hand was warm, his grip steady as he led me down the beach. The world felt far away, the only sounds the rhythmic crash of waves and the occasional call of a seagull. Finally, he stopped, turning to face me. The light of the moon cast soft shadows across his face, accentuating the sharp lines of his jaw and the intensity in his eyes. I can't stop thinking about you, he admitted, his voice low and raw. Every moment we're apart, I'm counting down until I see you again. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to say something, anything, but words failed me. Instead, I reached up, my fingers brushing against his cheek. He leaned into my touch, his eyes closing briefly before meeting mine again. This feels dangerous, I whispered, my voice trembling. It is, he said, stepping closer until there was barely any space between us. But it also feels right, doesn't it? I nodded, my heart pounding as he lowered his head. His lips brushed against mine in the softest, most tentative kiss, a question, a plea, and an invitation all at once. When I didn't pull away, he deepened the kiss, his arms wrapping around me and pulling me close. The world around us melted away. There was only him, his warmth, his touch, the way his lips moved against mine with a perfect balance of urgency and tenderness. Every nerve in my body came alive, and for the first time in years, I felt free. I was already in too deep. The weight of my decisions pressed down on me like the humid air outside, thick and stifling, leaving no room to breathe. I gave Liam a small smile, forcing myself to steady under his gaze. I need a shower, I said softly, trying to keep my tone light, casual, as if my emotions weren't unraveling right in front of him. But maybe. I'll see you later. His expression softened, and he nodded, though I could see something flicker in his eyes, hope, uncertainty, maybe both. Definitely, he said. Tonight? Tonight, I echoed, as if the word held the promise of more than just a few hours. As I stepped back into my room, closing the door behind me, reality began to creep back in, slipping through the cracks like an unwelcome draft. The first thing I saw was my phone on the nightstand, the screen lighting up with notifications. A string of messages waited for me, all from my husband. Him, how's the trip? Him, the kids miss you. Him, call when you have a chance. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening as guilt pushed its way through the fragile fantasy I'd been clinging to. Last night, I hadn't thought about him or the kids even once. That realization hit me harder than I expected, knocking the wind out of me. But as I stood there in this pristine, sunlit room, so far removed from the chaos of my real life, a strange sense of defiance stirred within me. Was it so wrong to want this for myself? To feel alive, even if just for a week? To be seen as something more than a mother, a wife, or a woman drowning in responsibilities? I wasn't ready to let guilt take this away from me. Not yet. I called him back, forcing a cheerful tone as I told him everything was fine. He didn't suspect a thing. His voice was warm, trusting, as he talked about the kids and their plans for the weekend. When the call ended, I set the phone down and leaned against the bed, staring at the ceiling. The tightness in my chest didn't ease, but I pushed it aside. I couldn't let this ruin the few days I had left. Not now. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I lounged by the pool, pretended to read, and tried not to count the hours until I'd see Liam again. But my thoughts kept circling back to him, to the way his touch lingered, the way he made me feel alive in ways I hadn't felt in years. When evening came, I stood in front of the mirror, choosing my outfit with a care I hadn't felt in years. A sleek black dress clung to my figure in all the right places, bold but elegant. My reflection felt unfamiliar, but it also felt like the me I had buried a long time ago. For one more night, I wanted to feel like her. When I arrived at the restaurant, Liam was waiting for me. The moment he saw me, his face lit up with that boyish grin that disarmed me every time. My heart quickened, and I felt my resolve weakening. This was supposed to be a fling, a fleeting escape from my life. But the way he looked at me, as if I were the only person in the world, made me want more. Dinner was magical, just like the night before. We laughed, shared stories, and stole glances that lingered too long. But tonight, there was something else, a deeper undercurrent that scared me. When he reached across the table and took my hand, his thumb brushing softly against my skin, I felt a lump rise in my throat. "I don't want this to end," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I know it's crazy, we've only known each other for a few days, but it feels like I've known you forever." I looked down at our hands, my mind racing. I wanted to tell him the truth, to confess that I wasn't the woman he thought I was, but the words caught in my throat. The thought of losing him, of losing this version of myself, was too much to bear. "Me too," I whispered, my voice barely audible. After dinner, we walked along the beach again. The stars shone impossibly bright above us, the waves crashing softly against the shore. He told me about his life, his dreams, his fears, the things he'd never told anyone else. I listened, soaking up every word, every detail, even as the weight of my lies pressed down on me like a stone. When we reached his room, he turned to me, his eyes searching mine. "Stay with me tonight," he said, his voice filled with longing. I hesitated, every rational part of me screaming to walk away. But when he cupped my face in his hands, his touch tender and grounding, I knew I couldn't say no. Not to him. The night that followed was more intense than anything I had ever experienced. His touch was electric, his kiss igniting something in me that I hadn't felt in years, something primal and alive. He made me feel beautiful, desired, and completely unburdened. For those few hours, I let myself forget everything else. I wasn't a wife, a mother, or a woman suffocating under the weight of her own life. I was simply me. But as the days went on, the illusion began to fray at the edges. Liam started asking questions about my life, my family, my plans for the future. I answered carefully, weaving half-truths into something that sounded believable. But each life felt like a thread tightening around me, threatening to unravel everything. My phone became a constant source of tension. Every time it buzzed with a message from my husband, panic surged through me. I answered his calls with a smile in my voice, telling him I missed him and the kids, but the words felt hollow. Every moment with Liam felt stolen, borrowed from a life I didn't want to return to. The morning of my departure came too quickly. As I watched the sunrise from my balcony, the weight of reality settled on my chest. In less than 24 hours, I would be back home, slipping into my old life as if none of this had happened. But how could I? How could I go back to being the woman I was before? A message from Liam interrupted my thoughts. Liam, coffee on the beach? One last morning together. The words hit me harder than they should have. I replied quickly. Meet you there in 20 minutes. When I arrived, Liam was waiting. He had set up a blanket near the water, a thermos of coffee beside him. When he saw me, he smiled, but there was a sadness in his eyes. We sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee and watching the waves. It was peaceful, almost too perfect. The thought of leaving felt like a physical ache. When do you leave? He asked quietly. This afternoon, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. His jaw tightened as he looked out at the horizon. I wish you didn't have to go. So do I admitted, tears threatening to spill over. Stay, he said suddenly, turning to face me. A few more days, weeks, hell, stay forever if you want. We could make this work. My heart ached at his words. He didn't know the truth. He didn't know I wasn't the woman he thought I was. And if he did, would he still look at me like this? Liam, I began, my voice trembling. I can't. Why not? He asked, desperation creeping into his tone. I know this is crazy, but I've never felt this way before. And I know you feel it too. I looked down, unable to meet his gaze. It's not that simple, I said. Then make it simple, he said, reaching for my hand. His touch was warm, grounding me even as I felt like I might fall apart. Tell me what's holding you back. I wanted to tell him everything, but the fear of losing him was too great. So instead, I shook my head. I just can't. The silence that followed was unbearable. Finally, I stood, brushing the sand off my dress. I should go, I said softly. He didn't stop me. That afternoon, as my plane ascended into the sky, I stared out the window, tears streaming silently down my face. I had left a part of myself on that beach, a part one wasn't sure I'd ever get back. At home, my family greeted me with smiles and hugs. My husband kissed my cheek, his touch familiar and warm, but it didn't spark the same fire. That night, as I lay in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling, I felt the weight of everything I had left behind. I would never see Liam again, but a part of me would always belong to that week, to that beach, to him. And even though I knew I could never go back, a small, quiet part of me hoped, no, wished, that one day, I might feel that alive again.